Good morning or good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. On this first slide on your screen, there is an image. It is the logo of the DOnetwork. There's a green rectangular box with an arrow pointing to the right, and inside the box there's a big blue DO, and underneath it says network in green, and then in a very faint writing it says disability organizing. Welcome to our National Disability Voter Registration Week webinar, and I thank you for those who joined early. So before we get started, just a little bit about the DOnetwork. We're hosting many different organizations today, and we'll get to hear about each one of them that have come together to put together National Disability Voter Registration Week. But the DOnetwork, to learn more about us, you can go to www.disabilityorganizing.net. And we provide technical assistance, resources, trainings, campaign coordination, team building, and capacity and power building for the disability community in California and with our partners across the nation. We like to say that we organize for accessible communities wherever people with disabilities live, work, learn, shop, play, and vote. And on this slide, we also have the DOnetwork's logo. Welcome, everyone, to National Disability Voter Registration Week webinar today. I'm very excited. We're going to be hearing about all sorts of different information and things about registering people to vote and voting in America. And this particular week is July 11th through the 15th, 2016. So I'm really excited that we're going to be hearing from a lot of folks today. So today's presenters in order, we're going to begin with Helena Berger, who is the Executive Director at the American Association for People with Disabilities, Bob Kafka from ADAPT and RevUp Texas, myself, Ted Jackson from California Foundation for Independent Living Centers, Jim Dickson, who's co-chair of the National Council on Independent Living's Voting Rights Subcommittee. And I'm very excited today to have Jen Tolentino from Rock the Vote today, Charlie Carr all the way from Massachusetts with the Disability Policy Consortium, and Zach Baldwin also with the American Association for People with Disabilities. Thank you very much, presenters and folks, for joining us today. And now I'm going to hand it off to Helena.
Thanks so much, Ted. I just want to take an opportunity to also welcome everybody and thank you for taking your time today to participate in National Disability Voter Registration Training and Organizing webinar. I also want to take a minute to thank Ted and the DOnetwork for providing this platform and all the technical assistance, and all of our other collaborative partners. And if you just bear with me, I just want to take a minute to make sure everybody's aware of all the efforts that are behind our National Disability Voter Registration Week. It's Association of Programs for Rural Independent Living, April. We have hashtag #CryptTheVote, National Council on Independent Living, National Disability Rights Network, RevUp Massachusetts, RevUp Texas, the Texas Disability Project, and hashtag Vote Disability 2016. So again, I just want to thank everybody on the phone and all of our partners. As Ted mentioned, we have a really great turnout today. We had 200 folks register. We had to actually shut down registration. So we're really thrilled with today's participation. But to be honest, today's the easy part. We hope after today's webinar you're even more motivated and energized to do some kind of voting activity during National Disability Voter Registration Week, which again will be held July 11th through the 15th. The RevUp campaign, which you'll hear more about from Bob Kafka, is all about building and showing our electoral power and making the disability vote count. We want to influence election outcomes at the national, state, and local level and make sure our elected officials and those running for office know there's a disability vote and they can get it if they support our issues. In the 25+ years that I've been advocating for disability rights, I think this is the most engaged I've seen our community during any election cycle. So I'm really very optimistic that we can have a real impact on November 8th and in the long term keep the momentum going to be just as influential in our state and local elections. So again, I just want to thank everybody for participating today. And let's all just get out there and rock the disability vote. And at this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Kafka to talk about the vision of Rev Up and the power of the disability vote.
And just one moment before Bob, just one moment before you begin, I just want to tell folks that there is an image on this slide, and it is the logo of AAPD. All right, thank you, Bob. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Ted. Thanks, Helena. Most people who, if they know me at all, know me as an ADAPT organizer. And, you know, ADAPT has this philosophy, what's called the pitchfork approach to advocacy. And political is one part of that. And what the Rev Up campaign is all about is to make the disability vote count. And again, that seems kind of simplistic when you first think of it. You know, of course, voting, people with disabilities vote, they count. But what candidates really want to know is that if they take a positive disability position on an issue, that you as a disabled person and your supporters will vote for them. That's really what, when we talk about the disability vote. And so Rev Up America, the campaign, making the disability vote count, is really a mechanism like other groups that have organized around voting to build a state-by-state networks of voting coalitions, whether it's under the name of Rev Up or it's something that's been happening in your state. But Rev Up is the uniform banner that we're marching behind, and AAPD has volunteered to be the coordinator, and they have their website, which you've seen on some of the slides. But Rev Up means, just you know, it's not a motor vehicle race car. Illusion is register, educate, vote, use your power. And power is what it's about, to be able to influence the political entities. And a politician, longtime Massachusetts Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, said something that I think we all should take to heart. He said, all politics are local. And what Rev Up essentially is what can you do in your state? What type of group that you can bring together to build a voting coalition that obviously we're pushing for involvement in the elections coming up on November 8th. But really, if the disability vote is really going to count long term, we really have to have voting coalitions be able to influence local, state, and national elections. And I just want to give an illustration. You know, a lot of times progressives, people that are, you know, tend towards the Democratic Party, laugh at the Tea Party and that. But when you look at what's happened, 80% of all state legislators are Republican. They have the House and the Senate, 31 governorships, and only 19 Democrats. Now, Rev is a nonpartisan, bipartisan, but again, what it talks about is that all politics are local, and so if we are going to be able to influence the candidates, we have to be able to show that we have power to be able to do that. And Rev Up is the vehicle. Rev Up Texas and Rev Up Massachusetts are the two I know best. There's about 11 to 15 states now either building a Rev Up state coalition. They're happening organically. You don't have to 501c3. You just have to have passion about bringing together the disability community. And when at least what we do in Texas, when we define the disability community, obviously the person with the disability is the main focus. But also we think of it as like pebble in a pond with all the ripples. We have family members, we have advocates, we have providers and professionals, we have bureaucrats, all that have an interest in possibly voting positively on disability issues. And so if you go through the slides that are in your computer, you'll see some of the issues that we've defined in Texas under the title of Texas. But again, issues are, what we want them to take positions on. So what I hope comes out of this webinar is obviously building for the National Disability Voter Registration Week, July 11th through the 15th. But even more, I hope you get in touch with us if you would want to start a Rev Up in your state and get information from those of us that have done it and also those that are also doing good work not only on registration, but ultimately after you get new people registered, something that Ted feels very strongly about, you then have to work even harder to get those people registered out to vote. And getting out the disability vote is the end result, but if we don't get people registered, they can't vote at all. So I think I'll stop there and hand it off. I believe it's Ed next. But please, really, rather than listen, I have a saying up on my wall. I'm looking at it right now as I'm speaking to you. Is do something even if it's wrong. And what I mean by that is that, call a meeting, bring various groups together, and rev up so that we can really have the disability vote become powerful and we can really implement the vision that we just celebrated in the ADA 25th anniversary. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Bob. Thank you very much. And I'm just going to go through and describe a few images here that were in Bob's presentation. On this slide here, Bob talked about the pitchfork plan for advocacy, and there is an image with a pitchfork on it. And then, of course, he talked about the Rev Up campaign, and we have an image here of a Rev Up Texas flyer that has at the top it says REV, and the V is a check mark like you would check on a ballot, and then it says up with an exclamation point, and it has a couple of stars in blue and red on it. And then of course we have a slide with the Rev Up logo. It's a round logo with the Rev Up symbol. Again, the V is a check mark like you would check off a ballot. It has some stars in it, and it says make the disability vote count. And then it also says on the bottom of the circle, register, educate, and vote. And those words are separated by some red stars. The logos and those types of materials for Rev Up, you can actually go to aapd.com/Rev Up and download these materials for yourself. So I want to thank Bob for joining us today. And there will be a question and answer period for all of our speakers later on. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about something I love to talk about, which is electoral power. And on this slide we have the DOnetwork logo, which I described earlier, and we have the hashtag Vote Disability logo. The hashtag Vote Disability logo is an aqua rectangle with a arrow pointing to the right. Inside of it, it says hashtag Vote Disability. The V is again a check mark, just like in the V in Rev Up. And at the bottom it says 2016. All right, so as we talk about electoral power, I think it's really important that we dive in to figure out why should campaigns and why should folks in elections be including voters with disabilities? or really why is it a priority, and why is it a priority right now? And as we do that, we should probably take a look at increasing voter registration and turnout over the last decade and a half. So there's some really interesting things and interesting numbers that have been happening. In 2000, when it comes to voter registration, we had a gap of about 16%. That means that we were, as a community, people with disabilities in general, 16% less likely to be registered to vote than people without disabilities. What we've seen over that period of time is that we're at now, by 2012, a 2.3% gap. That's really great. I mean, that's really incredible. We did see a drop, however, in the percentage of people without a disability that have registered to vote. So we're not quite sure what that drop is about for people without a disability. It could just be that with technology, they're going through the voter files and taking out people who've passed away and things like that more efficiently. So that gap, you know, is a 2.3%. However, compared to the higher registration numbers of before, we're not sure if it's actually in reality a little bit larger. But I'll take it for progress. We certainly have had a lot of progress there when it comes to voter registration. And some of the things that have helped with that are things like the passing of the Help America Votes Act, which most of us know for having put money out into states for electronic accessible voting machines, but it also reinforced the idea that folks needed to be registered to vote and put money out for efforts like that, as well as the great work that folks are doing at independent living centers or centers for independent living, depending on which part of the country that you're from, that you either go to a CIL or an ILC, and the great work that they've been doing over the years, as well as other disability organizations, to be consistent with registering people to vote as they come in to the Center for Information and Referral Benefits and Services. Also with turnout, we've seen some impressive results as well. So in 2000, there was a gap of about 11%. Some studies say about 12%. By 2012, that gap had closed to 5.7%, about 6%. So roughly half. And what that tells us, plus some focus groups that have been conducted by the University of California at Davis, the great study and work that's been done by Rutgers University with Lisa Scher and Doug Cruz, as well as some other studies around the country, is that part of that gap closing, about half, had to again do with the Help America Votes Act and putting those accessible voting machines into polling places, as well as polling place access and the Department of Justice and communities becoming active in breaking those barriers for people to actually get out and vote and be able to make a private and independent vote on their own inside the polling place. So the presence of the machine, the presence of that support and funding and the support for breaking those barriers decreases that gap by about 50%. But what we're also hearing in our focus groups, and we at the DOnetwork just did a project with UC Davis, is that folks, the other half of those folks, the other 5 to 6% that haven't really come out to vote, that are still registered to vote, aren't really feeling it, and they're not really feeling like the candidates are speaking to them. They're also still encountering some physical access issues at the polling places, as well as the inequality of vote by mail. Not everyone has the opportunity to vote by mail, and some things are changing in that direction with new technologies. So that kind of gives us an indication of why this year is so important. So let's just take a look at what this 6% looks like. If we were to figure out how we communicate with that 6% and turn them out, what does that look like to us? Well, the U.S. Census says that there's 36 million eligible voters with disabilities. In 2012, 15.6 million voters with disabilities turned out, and closing that 6% gap would be about 3 million more voters estimated in the upcoming election. 3 million more is significant. It's enough to swing an election, especially if that election is close. 126 million people voted in 2012. So if 126 million roughly come out in 2016 and the election is close, we could swing it for one candidate or another. And on this picture, or on this slide, there's a picture of a group of advocates in wheelchairs and power chairs, people with canes in a park in New York City. And on the previous slide, my apologies, I didn't describe the image. On the previous slide, we had a downward arrow to punctuate the decrease in the gap in voter registration, and we had an upward arrow to punctuate the increase in voter turnout for both for people with disabilities since 2000. And on this next slide, there's an image of a bunch of people in line, and they each have what looks like a bumper sticker that says "Vote." They appear to be ambulatory people, and then in the middle of the line, there's a person in a power chair. So how do voters with disabilities compare to other minority voting blocks? Well, we're going to take a look at the 2012 demographic groups of participating voters. And just a note on these, of course, voters with disabilities are all different types of people, so a lot of folks fit into more than one particular voting block. So there's about 20 million voters who are crossover in these numbers, who might have been a voter with a disability, but also might have been an African American or Latino, etc. So white non-Hispanic voters made up 98 million voters in 2012. But when we look at the we look at the minority voting blocks, we zero in on the largest one was African Americans at 17.8 million. Americans with disabilities were second, so that's significant. We're the second largest voting block in the 2012 election at 15.6 million. Latino Americans were 11.2 million, and Asian Americans 3.9 million. Now, if we add that 3 million, if we're able to achieve that 6% bump and add that 3 million voters, that would make us 18.6 million, and it would make us the largest voting bloc in America. That's really significant to building electoral power and to getting the attention of different candidates and different media outlets. One of the interesting things that I always like to point out as we look at this list of these four minority voting blocks is who are the ones that are most talked about. Certainly when we turn on CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, any of the cable news shows, we hear about the African American voting bloc. We hear a lot about the Latino voting bloc, but we don't hear as much about Americans with disabilities in our voting bloc. So we really have to do this surge to make people's minds open up to our presence in the electorate. But another piece of why this happens is that we're just not, at this point, included in the voter file. And that's kind of a technical term, the voter file. That is the sort of Excel sheet of all the voters in a state with all of the information that comes off of the voter registration card. And what's significant about that is based upon the information in there, pollsters and researchers are able to run polls on different groups. They can do geographical neighborhoods. They can do last name matchups. They can do language preference, which tells them who the Latino voting bloc is. And so there's a group of us right now that are working across the country to convince some of our state legislators and secretaries of state that maybe we need a request for accommodation or requests for our voter education materials in alternate formats, just like folks can request alternate languages other than English, so that we can have that data in there so that folks can begin to study the voting bloc. And once the pollsters start studying us, I think then we're really looking at a situation where the media will begin to follow us more significantly. And then, of course, the candidates are going to answer to our concerns in an election if the media is following us. So I want to talk about a little bit about what is so important to 2016. And folks can unmute their phones right now. because this is a little bit of a discussion on this particular slide. And we do have two images on this slide. One is a box that says Presidential Election 2016, highlighted in red, white, and blue with 2 stars around the 2016. And the other one is a cloud made up of words. And the words are different issues like childcare, social services, taxes, healthcare, economy, affordable housing, immigration, all the education, employment, all the issues that are in the election. So earlier I talked about how that extra 6%, those 3 million people, which is a significant group, but again, when we think about all the communities around our country, it's really not that many people. In fact, when we were doing some GeoTV planning in Humboldt County, which is a regional county in California, we ran the math on registered voters and discovered that it was only about 915 people over a 3-county area that they needed to increase the vote with and get 900 more people out to vote. So it then seems very doable to really zero in and get those people out to vote. And so that group in Humboldt County and the counties next to them, they're really looking at some of the focus groups and the studies that we've done that show that that extra 6% just hasn't had that extra push. They haven't had that that thing, from the candidates talking about them concerning, being concerned with their issues that's drawing them in. And I think this year's different. I think the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act renewed our energy. It really gave more spark to the advocate spirit. It allowed us to look back over the last 25 years, and sometimes even 50, 60 years, and see how far we had come and celebrate the advocacy of the past. But it also allowed us to take inventory of where we are today and where do we want to be at the 50th anniversary of the ADA. And so I think a lot of that, last summer folks started talking about, this year's halfway through in our celebration, and they started thinking about to this next year, and they thought, wow, we're in a different place than we were 25 years ago. We're in a place of more power where we can start engaging in the elections and even in the presidential election. And we're starting to see the result of that. We're starting to see people with disabilities being discussed in the presidential election. And so I want to open the discussions to ask folks, how have you heard about people with disabilities and our issues being talked about? And I put some sample questions up here. Who wants to continue our programs? Who is saying what about the Americans with Disabilities Act? Who's talking about issues like employment, housing, transportation, healthcare? And how are people with disabilities being characterized? So is there anyone who wants to answer any of those questions and talk about how they've seen people with disabilities in the discussion of the presidential election so far?
Yeah, Ted, can you hear me? This is Brian from Michigan. Yeah.
Yep. Go ahead, Brian.
I noticed. Yeah. Okay. So I noticed that the Democratic candidates have talked about disability issues in their speeches, like Hillary and Bernie. However, I'm pretty disturbed about the Republican side. I mean, nobody on the Republican side has talked about these issues, especially Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump doesn't even have a disability agenda or platform on his website. Can you explain why that is?
Well, I'm not Donald Trump, so I can't answer for his campaign. But I can say that I think there's been robust discussion in the Democratic debates. I think when Jeb was still in the race, Jeb Bush, he was consistently bringing up issues for people with disabilities. And in fact, I think Respectability, they did a survey of all the candidates, gave them the opportunity to fill out a survey. I believe Hillary got 100, Bernie got 100, and Jeb Bush got a 94. Kasich has routinely brought up issues for people with developmental disabilities and mental health disabilities. And people are going to have different thoughts about the way they bring them up. And the only thing I've seen from Donald Trump, I don't know if anyone else has, but he did do that mischaracterization of a reporter who has cerebral palsy. Brian, that was really great for you to bring that up. Is there anyone else who wants to comment on what they feel like they've been hearing from the candidates?
I think Donald Trump was trying to appeal to a certain demographic that may not care about individuals with disabilities.
Cool. Anyone else? All right, I'm going to move us along. Oh, hello?
Yeah, with Bernie Sanders, what he was trying to do was he had a speech in Sacramento, and he had a speech in the Bay Area, and he talked about it. He wanted to make sure that the program that he had was accessible. They were very, very good about having accessibility. And number two, he talked about the ADA. He talked about how the Republicans and how we didn't even support the worldwide ADA program for accessibility. And so he talked about that too. And he also talked about the UN Charter. And if you go to his platform, it's all on there. It's all in there. Just go to Bernie Sanders' platform, Bernie Sanders, the president.org, and you can see it all on there.
So I'm just going to remind folks, we're asking people about their personal opinions. None of the organizations that are putting on this webinar are promoting or supporting any particular candidates, and let's please refrain from doing anything that's an advertisement for a candidate or their websites or anything like that. We do need to remain nonpartisan, but certainly people are welcome at this point to express their opinions for the sake of the conversation about what they've heard. I'm going to call in one more person, and then I'm going to move along, and I see Ability 360 there.
Ed?
Yes?
Ed, this is Kate Garrison in Texas.
Okay.
I think from the fact, yes?
Yeah, I was calling on Ability 360. It's just hold on one second, Kate. I'll call on you in a second. Ability 360 asks, is there one website that is tracking candidate positions? Yes, there is Respectability. It's respectability.com, I believe. They do have a survey out, and they have a tracker of all of their quotes. So you can go to their website and track what they're saying. All right, Kate, what was your question?
Well, it's a comment, really. And I think what it says is, since there are only two testimonies to two Democratic presidential candidates, appears that not much being done by anybody else or has been done by anybody else at the national level, at least on the presidential. Are we going to focus only on the presidential, or are we also open to talking about senatorial and congressional races as well?
I think that you bring up something really good. I think that's a great question. And for us, we're talking right now from a national perspective, but that's really up to you. That's up to folks in the grassroots. Are you going to take this discussion and continue it further in your own states about your Senate candidates, about your congressional candidates, your candidates at the county level, at the local level, and the state level? That's really up to what you're going to do and what the information you take from today's webinar and other webinars, and if you're part of the Rev Up campaign or any of the other campaigns out there or training opportunities, whether you fold that and turn it around into action in your state is really up to you. So I know that a lot of the organizations, Kate, that are on this webinar today are here for you, and we're here to offer technical assistance and support for folks like you in the grassroots to take on these issues and to really press them forward. So in the interest of time, I'm going to ask folks to mute your phones by pressing *6, and I'm going to move us forward here. And just I'll say at the end of this slide here that I really believe the door has opened for us this year. I know that in my organization, we have gotten reached out to by many campaigns. in the presidential field as well as other fields on how to make their campaigns accessible, how to make their events accessible, what they, should they, have an ADA lead person on the ground. So that's really different, significantly different than my experience from 2014, and 2012. And I think that campaigns are starting to get focused, and we're starting to hear more about their focus on the disability voting block. And so really, all of this sort of comes together in our need to build electoral power. And what electoral power is it really is that combination of, capital in our community and being able to turn it around into votes at the voting box, votes at the voting box, at the polling place. Being able to demonstrate that we can measure our number of votes that come from our community and demonstrate those to our elected officials and hold them accountable to the size of our voting block. And there's a lot of folks working this year to make sure that we are building electoral power. Electoral power is what we see other communities have. We certainly see it in the LGBT community as a result of the many ballot initiatives that they had to fight over the last 15 years. I really believe that that's what brought the president to come out and support marriage equality. And so we want to build that same type of power in addition to the power we've already built so that we have a sustainable future and progress forward for our issues and for creating change and increasing access for people with disabilities. And we're going to do that by increasing voter registration. One of the great ways to do it is during National Disability Voter Registration Week in July. We're also going to do that by increasing voter turnout. Everyone counts in voter turnout. And we're going to, voter turnout really relies on voter education and being numbers driven in your contact. Really getting back and, all those people you registered to vote, connecting with them at least a few times, maybe 2 phone calls and an email. If you've got the resources, send them a postcard, but making sure that you bug them a little bit so they get out and vote. Voting is, it's like doing anything. It's like packing for a vacation. Your spouse will probably nag you 5 or 6 times before you actually pack for the vacation. And so, it's the same thing. We have to nag people a little bit to get them to turn out and vote, but also in the process, we're reaching out to them and connecting with them about their voter education needs. We're letting them know about hotlines. We're letting them know about where they can find alternate formats or where their accommodations or how their accommodations can be met. And we're organizing for 2016 and beyond. We're building a coalition that's going to continue to build electoral power for our community well into this next century. And just starting right now, we've got a great group of people that are working together from different organizations. Helena mentioned a lot of organizations this morning, earlier in this webinar, and I've got some logos up on this slide here from the DOnetwork, from Rev Up, the National Council on Independent Living, the American Association of People with Disabilities, the National Disability Rights Network, #VoteDisability, and #CryptTheVote, and there's many more out there that have come together to work collaboratively to build for our future. And so with that, it's my pleasure to move things forward and hand it off to a person who's been around the voting circles for many, many years, Jim Dickson, who is a co-chair from the Voting Rights Subcommittee at the National Council on Independent Living, and on this slide is one of NCIL's logos. Jim, welcome.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Dickson with NCIL. I want to first thank everybody for being on the call and remind folks that Disability Voter Registration Week is July 7 through 11, and I hope that you are all making plans now to conduct voter registration and register a lot of our folks. Ted talked about demonstrating our power. One way that other groups have done, and that I would encourage you to do, is put out a press release that you're doing a voter registration drive. Either before you do it or after, put out a press release and say how many people you've registered. The motor voter law, that's here on the first slide, and I'll paraphrase what's on the slide, requires that all agencies that primarily serve people with disabilities must do voter registration during. Agencies are required to do voter registration. One of the nice things about the motor voter law is if you're doing this year-round, then you've already got a list of registered voters who you can be sure that they vote. We're not just interested in presidential elections, we're interested in all elections. And particularly, we are interested in primaries. So when you register people to vote, keep their name, address, have a file so that you can do get out the vote work, make sure that they vote. There have been lots of studies, and it takes person-to-person contacts on the phone, face-to-face, to actually get non-voters to vote. I will end by saying that we need to have our folks registered. We need to have our folks voting. And something that we have to think about seriously is to start getting people with disabilities to run for office. And as Ted said, to run for office at the local level. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Jim. And now moving along here, I want to introduce Jen Tolentino from Rock the Vote. I'm very excited to have Rock the Vote with us. We've been trying to figure out for the past few years how we start to work together, and this is the first time that we're working together, and we'll be doing it some more at our conference coming up. So Jen, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.
I'm really excited to be here. I think this is a very important community that Rock the Vote, I'm sure, has wanted to be supportive of, and this is going to be an ongoing conversation where please feel free, if anybody on the webinar has any questions that I don't answer, or you just want to dig deeper into what we might do, or you have ideas, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm based out of Los Angeles. I am the Civic Technology Program Manager for Rock the Vote. So I manage our online voter registration platform and all of the different ways that Rock the Vote uses technology to reach voters. So we're always interested in innovating new ways that we can reach our audience and our constituents, and also providing partners with the resources they need to get their people registered and get them turned out. So I'm going to give you all a little bit of background on what our online voter registration platform is, how you can use it in your work, and then if you have any questions, again, feel free to let me know.
And just want to tell folks, there's a Rock the Vote slide up right now. The image is of a crowd at a rock concert. It says Rock the Vote, and the V is a check mark. Seems to be a theme today, just like the check mark on a ballot, and it says Online Voter Registration Platform. And then on this slide is Rock the Vote's logo. Thank you, Jen.
Sure, thank you. So as background, our platform is free to any partner organization that is interested in registering people to vote. It works in almost every state. The exceptions to that are New Hampshire, Wyoming, and North Dakota. But in every other instance, we are able to work with you to get your people registered. We offer 3 different options. The first is a widget, which you sign up for. You are able to co-brand, so it would have a Rock the Vote logo and whatever logo you upload, and you immediately are able to get started by registering people online. Another option you have, if you have a little bit more technical savvy, is a white label version. It's exactly the same interface as the widget and the Rock the Vote tool that we ourselves use, but you're able to modify the look and feel of the tool. So you can change the colors and the fonts and the branding. It feels a little bit more like it belongs to your organization. And then third option, depending on what your needs are, is we offer an API off of which you're able to build your own interface. So if you don't think that the flow that we've designed works necessarily for your audience, or you want to change certain things around, or integrate with different resources, or perhaps build an app, that's one option that you can also pursue. Most of our partners tend to go with either the widget or the white label version, but all of those are free options to partners that I'm happy to walk through. Additionally, all of our tools are, as I mentioned, free. They're mobile friendly, so they work on just a desktop. They're going to work on a tablet if you're going out in the field or if you're in an event, and then also on mobile phones. So you can send a text message or you can send an email, and if somebody opens it on their phone, they're still going to be able to read it. And it's also available in 13 different languages. So basically how it works when you want to place the tool on just a website, you can either do a link, which will open it up in a subdomain. You can embed it directly on your website via an iframe, or we can create a little button for you to click off and then it would open in another window. So there's a lot of different options. It's pretty simple, and again, I'm available if anybody has questions or how to actually embed it. Next slide.
And on this slide, there are 3 images. One is the Rock the Vote logo, and one is a voter registration page from their website, and the other one is another part of the voter registration form on their website.
So it might also be helpful for me to describe the 2. The one on the left is we have 2 different interfaces available. The one on the left is a 5-step process where it walks users through the process of registering to vote through 5 different steps. And then the image on the right is of a map, and that is a 2-step interface where the user would select their state, input their email address, and be brought to a page where they would finish the registration. So it's a little bit faster and it's mobile friendly. However, the 5-step kind of walks you through the process a little bit more in a guided manner. So you have your choice of one of those 2 interfaces to use. Next slide.
And on this slide, we have an image. We also have the Rock the Vote logo, and the next is it the next page, or is it the same page on the voter registration website?
Yeah, I think this might have gotten a little messed up because I have I had some animation here, but essentially this is the Rock the Vote tool popping out of the Election Protection Coalition website. On their webpage, they have a button for register to vote, and if a user clicks on that button on their website, it pops out the registration widget so that you're still on their page, but you have the registration tool highlighted for people. So this next slide is showing the vote.org, which is League of Women Voters website. They have the white label version of our tool embedded directly on their website. So it looks like a lot more seamless of a flow rather than a widget where it's branded by Rock the Vote. In this case, it's branded for League of Women Voters. In addition, we have the Rock the Vote logo on the page.
And folks, there's also the League of Women Voters logo, and then you see the side panel where you put your information on the Register to Vote 411 and the page that pops up. And there are some images on this page as well. We've got the Rock the Vote logo, and then there's the NCLR image. There's an image that says "Why Register" with a kind of an image of the Capitol with a black background, and then we have an image that looks like a mobile app on when you're through with the process to share something on social media with Facebook, Twitter, and texting a friend?
So this is an instance of a partner building off of our API, which they've created a custom interface. It was done by Me Too and NCLR, and they created the app called Latinos Vote. So it's essentially something where they created all of the graphics and the flow, and it's available in the iTunes and the Google Play Store for them to brand and take it out into the field and register their voters. So this is just an example of how that could potentially work. Next slide.
And Jen, before we move on, could you explain to us two things, what API stands for and what NCLR stands for?
Sure, sorry about that. So API is Application Programming Interface. It's essentially a way for different applications to be built off of data, and it allows them to create different things. So in this instance, the API allows you to provide information on a person, such as their name and their address and their date of birth. You send that to the API, and then the API, the one that we've built, knows to create a federal voter registration form, and then it sends that back to you. So APIs essentially let you do different things with data. NCLR is the National Counselor of La Raza, and they are really engaged in the Latino community.
This slide has the Rock the Vote logo on it, and then it has what appears to be a screen, and I'll let Jen describe what the computer screen is, what's on the information on here.
So this is the partner portal that any partner who signs up for a registration tool through Rock the Vote has access to. It essentially is a dashboard for you to track, all of the registrations that are coming through your tool. At the top, you have the main page, which is the dashboard, and you're able to navigate to reports to get a little bit more information and download CSV files. You can customize it by choosing different buttons for you to place on your website. And then there's embed codes where you're also able to grab the code for you to place it on your website if you wanted to do it as an iframe. In addition, the main dashboard itself has several different stats that, rather than necessarily downloading the CSV, you're able to just get a really quick glance at how your tool is doing. So for example, you'll get an overview of the completed applications within the last 24 hours, within the last month. You're able to see the breakdown by ethnicity and by gender, by age, by party, and then also information on the specific state. So all of this data is based off of the federal voter registration form. So it's information that those that are registering through your tool are providing, and we're able to save it and share it with you minus the sensitive information. So you will never receive a Social Security number or a driver's license number, but everything else that you would need to communicate with your people, to get them out to vote, to activate them for specific things, this is something that you're able to use. Next slide.
And I just want to, Jennifer, if I may, I just want to point out here, I mean, this is really incredible information that's on this particular page in their portal. Jen's going to go on and explain how you can take that information that you're able to retain from a voter registration and use it for GOTV. And this is just, gives you a flash of the people in your voter universe. But of all the demographics that pops up here, we don't see disability. And so I just want to punctuate that this is why it's so important for us to be advocating to get at least an accommodation request or a request for alternate formats like language has on the voter registration card, because that at least would pop us into this demographic information. And moving along to the next slide here. And this image on this slide is just the Rock the Vote logo.
Yeah, so this is essentially just giving you a high-level breakdown of all of the user information that you would be able to download from the partner portal, which is, whether they completed their registration, where that registration came from, the language that they used, date of birth, email, all of those different things that I outlined. And Obviously, disability is not a category, as was mentioned, that we kind of track because it's not a part of the federal form. So that was a really interesting thing to hear, is something that this community is interested in, and I'm certainly happy to be a part of those conversations to maybe modify the federal form or figure out how we could potentially on our platform add in some other checkbox to be helpful for that. So next slide.
No, I'm just going to say that the Rock the Vote logo is on this slide. Go ahead.
Okay. So another component of how you can customize the tools for yourself, we have auto reminders and customized emails that are sent out to users immediately following their registration. We have 2 different programs. In states that do not offer online voter registration, we send an immediate confirmation email, a reminder email a few days later, and a final reminder 2 weeks after they've submitted their information through the Rock the Vote platform. This is because we really want to make sure that users take that final step of not only completing the information, but they have to print, sign, and mail in their federal form. So we have a pretty robust chase program via email to make sure that they do that. In states that offer online voter registration, all we send is an immediate confirmation that thanks them for registering and gives them some information on if they ran into any problems, who to contact, and where to look to verify their status. So for partners, you're able to modify all of these emails if you're interested. You can change the sender, the subject, the content, however you want to make these look and feel more appropriate for your constituents. We're happy to help you do that. So that's another option for you to customize the platform for yourself. So, and this is, the Rock the Vote logo is also on this slide. This is an option for you to also do if you wanted to register people via SMS. We have the functionality to set up a SMS text queue for any registration tool that you guys want. We can do one broadly for the entire community if that's something you were interested in doing for your specific organization. But essentially how it works is you text any text to codes. You pick, Vote 2016 to RT Vote, and you can actually do that right now. We have that set up as a registration flow. And that begins a conversation in text message that will allow you to basically send a registration tool to a user's mobile phone. So just wanted to let everybody know that's another feature that we're happy to work with you guys on to make sure it works for your partners. Next slide.
And this slide has an image of people in a crowd, and they're holding up phones, taking a picture of something, and then one person's phone, it looks like an iPhone, has the Rock the Vote logo on it.
Great. So this is that's a basic overview of our online voter registration platform. Again, it's free. I'm happy to walk anybody through how to use it, talk about any modifications we can make that would be useful for you. It will give you the tools that you need to get your people registered on your website and then have all of the back-end information to send them the follow-up emails to make sure they understand about why this election specifically is really important. It's just a really great organizing tool that I'm happy to answer any questions about if anybody has any.
All right, we're going to stop here for questions before we go on to Zach at the very end. Does anyone have any questions for Jen? Or anything you've seen so far?
Yeah, this is Kate in Texas again. I have a question back on the statistics regarding the actual disability vote in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
How do we know? I mean, how is that data collected? How do you know how many are represented voted?
That is an incredibly great question, and I will punctuate this for the third time getting us on the voter registration card. So the way that statistics are usually done is for a community is because we're able to take out of the voter databases information about a community, and we can't really do that about our community without having some sort of indicator on that voter registration card that tells us this is a voter with disabilities. So we're unable to create a random sampling. Most of our numbers and data and most of what most of us use come from the Rutgers University study done by Lisa Scher and Doug Cruz. And they go through the painstaking process of identifying voters with disabilities, working with U.S. Census data, matching it to voter files, doing surveys. I mean, it's a very painstaking process for them. Unlike other researchers who can very easily go into a state voter file, there are programs that have algorithms that can go through the data and pull out a random sampling of people within a community. But that's a really great question. But they do a great job at Rutgers. I hope that they get funding. They were not able to do a 2014 study. They just did 08, 10, and 12. I hope they get more funding so that they can do 2016, and we can see if we moved any numbers. But it is a pretty painstaking process to do that. Great question. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to move us along. Well, Jen, thank you very much. I think that our group will probably be talking to you about our National Voter Registration Week, maybe using some of the technology that you just showcased for us. It was really awesome. And I'm going to introduce our next speaker, and that is Charlie Carr from Massachusetts at the Disability Policy Consortium. And on this particular slide, there is the Rev Up logo. With, of course, the V is the check mark. Charlie, are you there?
I want to go back to a comment that Bob made in the very beginning, and that is that, all politics is local. And certainly getting out the vote in the disability community is political. And so Massachusetts is a relatively small state. It's a state of 6 million people, and like most other states, it has an evolving group of people with disabilities who have taken on, various things that have come up over the years. And it seems like, to me, the things that have drawn us together the most have been the ADA passage and voting. And voting has been something that we've worked on here in Mass, like every other state, for a long time, and we just never really got a lot of traction. And I think somebody else mentioned that this year, because of the incredible importance of issues, not only to the general public, but to us who indeed represent the general public, it's so incredibly important that there is a need to come together, and there is a renewed spirit, given that we know we had the power to pass the ADA. So we started Rev Up Mass, and the idea behind it was we got this group of leaders in the community together and started a task force. And when we thought about the task force, we thought about what would be the organic groups that would comprise a group that would drive the agenda. And so, as been mentioned frequently, independent living centers are certainly a group that that is important and is part of our task force. And we meet, by the way, this task force meets monthly to get together and discuss, strategies for creating this Get Out the Vote campaign. But the other key partner here is the Disability Law Center, and they are a protection and advocacy agency. And I think one of the things as you think about other states is, this takes money to do this. It takes effort. It takes resources. And a lot of us don't have much money, but one of the things the P&A agency does have is HAVA money, Help America Vote Act money that is specifically earmarked to assist disability organizations and people in getting out to vote. So DLC has been very key and very generous in sharing that HAVA money with us to get our, to meet the logistical stuff, have meetings and so on, and of course Chris Griffin's leadership. We also involve ASAN. We want very much to have the autism community at the table. There's a really neat evolving group of young leaders that are coming out of the autism movement, autistics that are very vocal, very intersectionality oriented, and really refreshing. And we wanted to make sure that they were at the table. So these are things that I hope you'll think about in your states. The other group that we pulled in is a group called Mass Advocates Standing Strong, and they're a chapter of SAVE, Self-Advocates Becoming Empowered, on the national level, and they primarily represent people with developmental disabilities and sometimes intellectual disabilities, but primarily DD folks. And then we wanted to bring in Massachusetts our statewide coalition that does education and advocacy legislation and stuff is called the Disability Policy Consortium, which is the group that I work with. But we wanted to make sure that a cross-disability statewide group is at the table. The other group that has, I think, a huge stake in comprising your group is the DD councils. All the DD councils are all required statutorily to support people with disabilities in living in the community. And part of living is voting. And we've turned to our DD council to support us in website development, data collection, and other things that they're in a position to help us with. And then other disability organizations. Look, it's no secret that we are so siloed that sometimes it really works to our detriment. We're trying very hard to be as inclusive as possible because remember, voting cuts across the agendas of any of these groups. So that's kind of how we formulated our task force and the thinking behind that group that again meets regularly. We held a kickoff forum last November, and we asked Bob Kafka, Stephanie Thomas, and Jim Dickson to come and speak to a group. We pulled about 125 people from around the state together. And this is the moment when we realized as a group that Rev Up made the most sense for us. It's a model that really resonated with us, especially after Bob and folks gave their presentation. So this is the birth, really, of Rev Up Mass. And Chris Griffin called Bob and said, hey, we really like this. Can we use it? And he was like, sure. And, so it works for us. And as you think about your state, if it's a model that seems to work for you, AAPD has a great website that you can go to. It gives you all the information that you need. As I said, we created a Rev Up website, and it's a lot of information like how do I vote? Did you know that it's a law that automark machines are required in every voting place and all that kind of stuff? But it also has an area where we're asking people to register because, again, we're building that database that we hopefully, we know will be used in hopefully getting pollsters, polling companies to use us as a demographic. And by the way, we are working with our state office to get them to modify the voting laws to include requiring a reasonable accommodation and alternative format. So that's the RevUp Mass.org webpage. Simple things, outreach. Cable TV is free. Again, Griffin has one that she does monthly in Boston. Cable, she had a nice RevUp-oriented cable show one night, and she'll do another one that's specific to voter registration. But this is things that can be done in all of our communities. We all have cable outlets. We just have to do it. The next thing we did was we wanted to get together our initial gathering in November and bring everybody back together again and sort of refresh them, remotivate them, and get them to recommit to getting out the vote, not only for the general election, but for the congressional elections and local and, well into the future. So we held a second forum, and actually we held a second forum. And this time, Griffin again had reached out to the Election Assistance Commission and asked that someone come, that it be held here. And it was held here in Boston. And we had a panel of people with disabilities testifying about the difficulties of voting. And that was a great way for them to hear directly from us. And there was a good interchange. There were good questions asked. Ted, you sat on the panel. Others, it was great. And there was an educational situation for them. In the afternoon, we had our own RevUp meeting. And we did ask Ted to come and present. And he presented much of what he outlined earlier, but we spent a lot of time and we were able to really get down to we were educated. We learned about what other groups are doing, Latinos, LGBTQ, how they got to that place where they're now regularly involved in the process, mentioned, included, and we learned. So we took from that a charge to really go away and do some very separate community-based RevUp meetings, and to get our different communities involved, all kind of reporting up through this RevUp Mass website for materials, for data collection especially. So now we're looking at doing different things in different areas in the state, and bottom line is we want to be able to perpetuate this process so that it goes beyond just the general election. And so that's where we're at in Massachusetts.
Thank you, Charlie. That was awesome. And now we're going to move along, and I want to introduce everyone to Zach Baldwin from AAPD. Thank you for joining us today, Zach.
Great. Thanks, Ted. And I'll try to keep this quick as I know we're running short on time, so we can move right ahead to the next slide here. Just want to close the webinar giving some folks some more resources on how to get engaged with National Disability Voter Registration Week for the week specifically and on as your registration activities. So on this next slide, if we can move over there. So on this slide, there's an image of the RevUp logo. This is a circular logo. Segues nicely into one of the things that we can offer on the AAPD website. We have RevUp images and toolkits. So the one you see here is one of the logos we have available. You've seen some earlier in the presentation. There's a rectangular one. There's a voting poster with Justin Dart on it that says vote as if your life depends on it, because it does. A few other images. Some of them are customized for social media. All of this is available free. For you to download. You can modify it, make it specific to your organization or your state. We want to provide you with as many resources as we can to help you organize around voting in your community. We have a toolkit available that help you plug in some information specific to your state to help folks identify where they can go to register, what resources they have to register, as well as any deadlines around primaries or the election. We also have a state resources and events page. This is a long list of state-specific resources and events, as it's called, so you can find out what events are happening in your state, what resources are available. You can see what individuals or other organizations are organizing in your state. And more importantly, you can see the states that aren't yet included on this list. So if you're in one of those states, then we really want to get in contact with you to see what you're doing, to support you to do something, put your event up on there, help get you connected to other people so we really spread our impact here. And lastly, we have a voter resource center. I put one example on here from Nonprofit Vote. They offer a lot of tools, fact sheets, checklists, resources on nonpartisan voter engagement. I definitely recommend everyone checking them out for any voter registration activities you may do. In addition to that, we list Rock the Vote on the same in the same area. We also have some resources for individual voters around voting and guardianship, accessible voting. We have some resources on the current 2016 election, the few candidates that are still left in it, all nonpartisan, just trying to put forth what they've said about disability issues. So if we move on to the last slide, I want to close and reiterate that we'll be pushing out more information between now and National Disability Voter Registration Week, which is July 11th through the 15th. So be sure to stay in contact with us. You can sign up and join AAPD's email list, or you can check in at www.aapd.com/revup. We'll be updating that page regularly. So I want to thank everyone for joining. We really appreciate your interest and your dedication to helping us make the disability vote count.
All right. Thank you very much, Zach. And now we're going to open the floor again to questions from any of our speakers. On this particular slide, we have a picture of a classroom with a lot of students raising their hands, and there's a blackboard behind the teacher who stands at the front of the classroom. So are there any questions out there? Are there folks who'd like to ask questions of our speakers today?
Do we find all that information on RevUp Massachusetts website?
Charlie, do you want to answer that?
Yes, you can find all the things that I referenced on the revupma.org website. This PowerPoint won't be up there, but everything that I've discussed is up there, yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Brian from Michigan again. I wanted to ask about online voting. Several months ago, or I think it was about a month ago, I got an email from the White House saying President Obama introduced this idea of online voting, because I vote absentee at the present time, and I've been talking to the people at the Election Assistance Commission here in Michigan about putting an online ballot, rather than having to have somebody assist me vote. Are you guys pushing for that as well, or what about that?
Yeah, that's an incredible question. I can tell you it's something that I've been involved with. I know that Jim's been very involved. Jim Dickson's been involved with it. I was part of a group that was convened by the Civic Center for Design and National Federation for the Blind that actually wrote the map of processing that you would need to do what we call remote ballot marking, which is also sometimes called accessible vote by mail. And it's the recommendation to Congress for creating this. While there is a recommendation for Congress, and that same recommendation is to all 50 states, that laws have to be passed in the different states. So currently in California, we have two laws that in combination with one another, if they're both passed in the next year, would allow for accessible vote by mail, which means that a person on request could request that their ballot is sent to them electronically. They could use their computer and their assistive technology on their computer to complete that ballot, but then the sending back of the ballot would still need to be printed out, and it would need to be physically sent out. But at least during the act of voting, they would have the, just one moment, Jim. During the act of voting, they would have the ability to cast their ballot. I can, if you just let me finish just one moment here. And they would have the ability to cast their ballot independently and privately, which is what is guaranteed to them. Now, there are lawsuits out of California, Ohio, and Maryland that are all making their way through the federal court system, and so it may be that the courts weigh in on that as well. The remote ballot marking has been used for some time now for what we call UOCAVA voters, military and overseas voters, and so folks are starting the conversation of, can we use this same system for people with disabilities? So you bring up a great point. Jim, go ahead.
Okay, this is Randy Harrison, CDR, and Kirsten goes to all of them. You guys said there was a survey that was done on how many people are voting and what kind of disabilities they had. I may have missed this, but is there a new updated survey coming? And will the funding come from that to have that survey happen?
That would be a great question for Jim if he's on, or if anyone else feels like they can answer that question.
Are you talking about the Rutgers survey that was mentioned earlier? It was, so I believe it. We did not, or they did not receive funding rather in 2014 to conduct or in 2016 this year. I'm sorry, conduct the survey again, and they are applying for the next cycle. So it's still to be determined right now if they'll get funding to do another survey.
Well, I'm going to move us along just a few final slides here if folks will just stay with us for a moment. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. If you have any questions about getting to the recording of today's webinar, sharing it with other folks, or anything, any questions, further questions for any of the panelists or speakers today, I'm happy to facilitate that process for you. You can just reach me at the information on this slide. My phone number is 916-325-1690, extension 337, or my email is ted@cfilc.org. Our website is cfilc.org, or www.disabilityorganizing.net. And folks, just one last thing. We've talked a lot about voter registration, but what is next after voter registration? And that is get out the vote and pushing folks out to make sure that once they're registered that we make sure they actually vote. So coming up, there is the hashtag Vote Disability 2016 GOTV Leadership Conference. It's in Pasadena, California on June 15th and 16th. And you can, at this particular two-day conference, you'll learn the techniques and skills for developing messaging that will motivate people with disabilities to go out and vote. And then on the second day, we'll go over a lot of the techniques and skills for actually connecting with them and making sure they do vote. There are scholarships available for this conference. So if you go to our website, disabilityorganizing.net, click on the button for the conference to learn more, and you can apply for a scholarship in the registration form. So if you want a scholarship, go ahead and fill out the registration form and apply for a scholarship. We do have scholarships to bring folks in from around the country as well as in California, but time is limited. So please go as soon as possible to do that. And just want to tell you on this slide, there is an image of the United States Capitol with the Vote Disability logo and pictures of people at different protests and rallies in the sidebars of the image. Thank you all very much for joining us today. And we should have this webinar up on our website in about 2 weeks. Thank you.